Well, good evening, and welcome to Kopernik's Friday Night live stream. I'm Drew Desker, director of the Kopernik Observatory, and I welcome our regulars that come back every week, and I also want to welcome anybody who might be viewing us for the first time. For those that aren't familiar with Kopernik, we are a public observatory and science center in upstate New York, near Binghamton, New York, and normally we would be having people here on a Friday night for our Friday night programs on a wide range of topics on science or technology. Not always astronomy, but although tonight's program is about the space program. But unfortunately, almost a year ago now, we've been unable to have people physically up here at to join us, so we figured we would just go ahead and try to reach out to us to you virtually here, and so that's what we're doing. So okay, actually I'm hearing my harsh sound, so I'm going to back off the volume a little bit, and hopefully that will that'll help me. I got my feedback mechanism going here. Okay, very good. Anyway. So again, for those of you who are new, all of our live streams are actually on our YouTube channel. So if you haven't already, look down below and subscribe to our YouTube channel, and then you'll have access to all of the previous live streams. We've got a lot of great material there. But tonight we're gonna take a trip down to the Johnson Space Flight Center, and Patricia Moore, who does these kinds of outreach for NASA, specifically about the Artemis program, and we're really very fortunate to have her. I'm really excited. I'm really looking forward to us returning to the moon. I'm going to date myself here. I remember watching Neil Armstrong walk on the moon, and I'm looking forward to seeing the first woman on the moon. And now that we've got our technology has improved so much more. What more can we learn by going to the moon and doing that? And I think we'll let Patricia do that for us. So, Patricia, thanks again for spending your dinner time with us.
I ate before, so I'm good. I'm nice and full and I'm ready. But thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to talk with you guys today. I'm gonna go ahead and share my screen and share sound. Cool. All right. So I'll tell you a little bit more about myself and background in a bit, but I am Patricia Moore, and I work at Johnson Space Center and am part of the Artemis Communication and Outreach team. We do a lot of public engagement in lots of different ways. And before I talk all about Artemis, I want to get everybody excited and kind of pumped up with a video that talks about the program and kind of where we're going, and it's very inspiring, and I hope you like it.
50 years ago, we went to the moon. We called it Apollo. What many people don't know is that Apollo had a twin.
She was a woman named Artemis, goddess of the moon.
We are returning to the moon
As a new generation of explorers, this time to stay.
And to prepare to achieve humanity's next giant leap of sending the first human missions to Mars.
We believe our course will redefine what is possible.
That we would discover life-saving,
Earth-changing science.
and that the challenges ahead will inspire generations.
This is our manifest.
For all who wondered if we could return,
For all who dreamed of pressing beyond.
This is your calling. We go for all of America.
We go. We go as the Artemis generation.
we go.
Awesome. And that was Gene Kranz right there at the end, for those of you who may not recognize him. If you're familiar with the Apollo program, it's all about, Apollo 13. He was a flight director during the Apollo program. All right, so here's a fun picture of me when I was in college. I got my first taste of space and really enjoyed teaching folks about NASA and about the space program when I was in college, and I was actually going to college to be a teacher. And I worked at our visitor center at Space Center Houston for a really long time. I met my husband there. That's a picture of us in 2001. And so we're a space family. We worked at Space Center Houston together, and we work at NASA together now. So I started off space education and outreach when I was 18. And then I worked at Space Center Houston for almost 10 years, and I left in 2009 and got a great opportunity to come and work at the Johnson Space Center Education Office in a program called the Digital Learning Network. And so that's not around anymore, but basically what we did is we'd spend all day long on camera teaching students science lessons all about the solar system and about the space station and anything really that NASA was working on. And part of that, I got the chance to work with astronauts and do interviews during their analog or mock missions, and connect them to students and do outreach that way. Got to fly on the reduced gravity plane, which has been the coolest thing I have done at NASA, and got the chance to experience what it's like to float in microgravity, even if it is for only about 15 seconds at a time, and film some videos for NASA. And then in 2014, I transitioned from the education office to our HEO, which is our Human Exploration and Office, our mission directorate that focuses on human spaceflight. So I work for their communication and public outreach team now, and I primarily work with observatories and planetariums and museums and science centers, helping share all of the NASA resources, and then doing outreach events like this. So here's some of my fun things that I've done over the last few years, and I'm super excited to share with you all about NASA's Artemis program and answer any questions you have. I will go ahead and preface it that I am not an engineer. There are many, many questions I can answer, but if you start asking me technical questions about like wires and bolts and different metals and that kind of thing, I can't help you. But if it's something that's a burning question, make sure you let me know, and I will ask one of my engineering friends next Monday and get an answer for you. All right, so you learned a little bit about the Artemis program in the video, and Drew mentioned it earlier how we're going to send the first woman and the next man to the moon, and we're really excited. And Artemis is just the perfect name as a sister name to the Apollo program, and all of that is super exciting. But one of the big parts about Artemis that's different than Apollo is we're going to the moon to stay, and you'll hear me say sustainable presence a few times throughout the presentation. And basically, what we want to do is have a permanent presence on the moon. So once we get there, we want to continue to send missions over and over again, and then get to a point where we have people living on the moon, just like we have people living on the International Space Station. There are many wonderful reasons why we should return to the moon, and you will get a different answer depending on who you ask at NASA. We all have priorities, and even you yourself probably have things that you feel are more important than others. But to our science community and our geologists and scientists, and our planetary scientists, they are so excited about going to the moon because we're going to a different area. I always like to tell kids, if you were an alien and you came to Earth and you only visited New York, is that a good representation of our entire planet? And the answer is no. Our planet's very diverse and different depending on where you are, and the moon is the same way. We're going to be traveling and going to the South Pole region, which is completely different from the equatorial area where we went during the Apollo missions. So we'll be able to study our planetary processes, the volatile cycles, which is basically the water that's on the moon, and help us understand how it got there, where did it come from, can we use it? The impact of asteroids and meteors on Earth and Moon. There's so much information there to learn. And then it's a platform really to study the solar system because we don't have the atmospheric distortion like we do here on Earth with our telescopes. And so there's a greater advantage of setting up observatories or satellites or even telescopes on the surface of the moon. Now, if you ask the people on my team that are focused on the human part, we want to go to the moon to prepare to Mars. That's the goal. And we need to test our rovers, our spacesuits, our habitats, our spacecrafts, our tools, our environmental control systems, and all the things that we use on the space station to stay alive now has to be modified to work on the surface of the moon. And then from there, we learn a lot so we can prepare for Mars. There's also the economic benefits of space exploration. NASA is a government agency, and there's and all of the money that's pumped into NASA, the majority of it is then pumped out into the economy for jobs with all of our industry contractors and all of the companies that support NASA. So we create lots of jobs, and we foster really great partnerships within the international community. We have partnerships with countries that are difficult to have political partnerships with, but we have great scientific partnerships with. So that's just a few of the great benefits of returning to the moon and continuing to explore together. Now, I mentioned we're going to the South Pole. The South Pole region is really exciting because we know that there's water ice in the impact craters. If you look at this time-lapse video, you'll see that there are permanently shadowed areas of the craters, and these areas never get sunlight. So we know there's water ice that's there. And if you notice the rims of the crater, you'll see that there's a lot of sunlight, almost constant sunlight throughout the year. There's a few months that it gets dark, but for the most part, there's constant sunlight throughout the year. And that's really important because we need light. It's too dark for our astronauts. We need the sun. And we also are going to depend on the sun for solar panels and our electricity as well. So there are many benefits to going to the South Pole, and this is the place that our scientists want to go. Now, we have a saying at NASA that mission needs drive design, and this is really important to understand because I get a lot of questions about, well, why can't we just hop on a Soyuz rocket and go to the moon? How come we can't use the SpaceX rocket and the Dragon to go to the moon? And the reason is each of these rockets and spacecraft is designed to go to a specific or a certain area within space. So the Soyuz rockets and the rockets that the Air Force uses to send satellites and SpaceX and a lot of these new companies that are building rockets, and even our space shuttle, and those rockets were all made to go in low Earth orbit. It's only 250 miles above the Earth. That's where the space station is, and it takes a few hours to get there, and a few hours to get home. And your heat shield comes in when you come into the atmosphere. You're traveling at 17,500 miles an hour and experiencing maybe 3,000 degrees Fahrenheit heat. Now, when you go to the moon and Mars, you have to have a more robust rocket that can get you away from Earth's gravity, okay? So you're not just trying to stay in Earth orbit within our gravity. We want to get away. So your rocket has to be bigger, and one of the most important pieces is your spacecraft. Your spacecraft has to be robust and rated for deep space. When you're in deep space away from Earth's magnetic field, you get more radiation, you have a higher chance of micrometeorite impact, there's 1,000 more things that can go wrong. And so these spacecrafts have to be created for a more robust situation and way more challenges. And so that's why we can't just hop in any of the rockets and spacecrafts we have right now and go on to the moon and Mars. So NASA's been working the last several years on creating a new heavy lift rocket called the Space Launch System. Our prime contractors for this is Boeing, and then Aerojet Rocketdyne is building or is repurposing some of the old space shuttle engines for the bottom 4 main engines, and then the boosters come from what used to be called Orbital ATK, which is now Northrop Grumman. So you'll hear some familiar names, and these companies all were awarded contracts to help build the Space Launch System. Now, the Space Launch System will be the most powerful rocket NASA's ever built. It will be the most powerful rocket in existence. So right now, there's not anything that's close to being ready that we could use instead. So, launch system, the backbone, our lunar exploration, but that doesn't exclude other rockets that are later developed from NASA using. We are definitely open and willing to use other rockets that are created in the future if they meet all the requirements. The first version of the SLS will launch on Artemis 1 sometime at the end of this year. I have not heard any different that we're skipping into 2022. A lot of that has to do with our testing that's happening the next couple of weeks, but we're still holding fast to that 2021 timeline, and I'm sure you'll see it in the news if it slips any. But the Space Launch System rocket's first version is 322 feet tall, and then the final iteration with the big upper stage section that will be able to carry really the large payloads like your huge landers and your all of your habitats and things like that you would want to take with you. That one's going to be 1 foot taller than the Saturn V. Just so we can say it's taller. I'm sure that wasn't a me thing. I'm sure the engineers just wanted to say it was 1 foot taller.
I was going to say
it will be.
it's like you got to have a guitar amplifier going to 11. Just one more, right?
Yes, 1 foot taller. And so I always think that's funny to share. But it's going to be a pretty impressive rocket. And if any of you were lucky enough to see a Saturn V rocket launch in the 60s and 70s, this thing is a beast. And I am so excited to see it launch in the next year. Now, it's almost finished. I mean, all the pieces are finished, and they're in the final testing of the core stage at Stennis, Mississippi. They had a few hiccups with a valve recently, and so they fixed the valve as of this week. And they are going to announce the final test date next week. So we'll get to test the core stage and fire all 4 engines at the same time one more time. And then if everything checks out, off it goes on a barge to Kennedy Space Center. And that's really the last piece we're waiting on. The Orion spacecraft is where the astronauts will sit. Just like we had an Apollo spacecraft, we have Orion. And you're probably thinking, wow, it looks a lot similar. And the reason it does is because physics hasn't changed. When it comes to entering the atmosphere at 25,000 miles an hour, a teardrop, gumball-shaped spacecraft is the best shape to withstand those temperatures and help the astronauts get home safely. We can't have anything with wings like a space shuttle because we're just coming in too fast and it would burn up. It's perfectly aerodynamic in the way we need it to be. And there are lots of differences, though. It's 30% larger, an incredible computer and avionics system that rivals, of course, what we would have in the 60s and 70s. We have the capability of fitting astronauts as small as 4'10" up to like 6'4" in the seats comfortably and safely. So it's made for a diverse group of astronauts, which would include men and women. And one of the cool things about Orion is we have our first international partnership with Artemis with the Orion spacecraft. The service module, which is the piece that has the solar panels, that's being built by the European Space Agency and Airbus, which is one of their contractors out in Europe. So it will have solar power, which will be its way of getting power up once it's out in space. All right, and the Orion spacecraft for Artemis 1 is finished, and it is assembled, and it is ready to be put on top of that rocket. It's already at Kennedy Space Center right now, and there are in designs and building pieces of Artemis 2 and Artemis 3 already. So magic, all the magic happens in Florida. Of course, you've got Disney and you've got Universal and you've got Kennedy Space Center. That's when all of the magic happens when it comes to launch. And this huge building, the vehicle assembly building, is where they assemble all of our human spaceflight rockets. You did it for the Apollo days, we did it for the space shuttle, and now it'll be for the Space Launch System. And here's a look of kind of what it looks like right now. This picture is maybe a week or two old. It's not too old. And we have our solid rocket boosters already stacked inside, and you can see that there's a hole in the middle, and that big hole is going to be for the core stage, and that's where we'll slide that down, and then we'll put the Orion on top. So we're progressing and we're moving along, which is really exciting. Now, one of the interesting things about launching at Kennedy is we have to get things from that building out to the launch pad. And the way that we do that is we've created a mobile launcher on top of our crawler transport. So what we do is we will assemble the rocket inside the VAB on top of the crawler and attach it to the mobile launcher. And then we will drive the whole thing out to the launch pad. It will launch, and then the crawler will bring back the mobile launcher. We'll get it fixed if there's any fixing that needs to happen and get it ready for the next launch. And if you've ever watched the crawler videos on maybe YouTube or on the internet, it moves at like 1 mile an hour. It's really, really slow. And it's the same crawlers that we used in the Apollo days. They've just upgraded them to be able to withstand heavier loads and done some, of course, upgrades. But it's this technology that was amazing and tried and true, and there was no reason to build something new. So they just upgraded it, and that's what we're using. So I'm going to walk you through Artemis 1. This is our animation video. Turn down the sound so it's kind of, so I can actually talk about it. There we go. All right, so this sequence starts at about 10 minutes before launch. That's when, I guess, the most exciting things start to happen. I will point out, if you're not familiar with, like, the flame trenches that NASA uses on the launch pads, there's this huge, massive, like, ditch that's underneath the launch pad that they fill full of water before launch. And so when you see all that smoke that comes out, it's actually steam. All of that really, really hot gas air, hits that water and causes steam. And the reason we do that is because the vibrations would be so great that it would break apart the rocket. And so that water helps absorb those vibrations. They call it the sound suppression system. So they get all that put together and ready to go. And here's a look at our launch director, Charlie Blackwell-Thompson. She's the first female launch director, which is really exciting. And she will be the one to make the call, go or no go, for all of our Artemis launches and our Artemis missions. So right when we're like at 1 or 2 minutes before, that's when things get really exciting. They shoot little sparks out underneath the engines to get rid of any off-gassing that might happen, to make sure things are clean and ready to go. And then about 3 or 4 seconds before launch, they fire the 4 engines at the bottom. And this gives them a few seconds to determine whether or not they want to proceed with launch, because we can turn those on and off, because they're run with liquid fuel. And so if everything checks out, the computer makes a really fast decision and says, yes, we're good. And then NASA will fire the 2 solid rocket boosters, which are 1 segment taller than what we used on the space shuttle. And once those are lit, as you know, they burn until they fall off. We cannot turn off the solid rocket boosters. So they burn for a little over 2 minutes. And this time, we are already in space when they come off. When we were during the space shuttle program, we weren't going as far and as long, right? We weren't traveling as fast. But now, all of the pieces of the rocket fall off when we're already in space. And so the only way we could retrieve and reuse them is if we put really heavy heat shielding around them, which NASA decided wasn't worth the money or cost effective to do so. So they just burn up in the atmosphere, and we build new ones each time. Maybe one day technology will advance where we come up with really low mass and low weight heat shielding, but right now there just isn't anything that we can do about that. So once the tanks are gone, we continue orbiting the Earth for another hour or so, and we do like a checkout just to make sure everything is working properly, and then we fire that intercryogenic propulsion system, which is an in-space rocket engine that will push us away from Earth's gravity and send us towards the moon. And then we come home and splash down in the ocean just like we did during the Apollo missions. So that's kind of an overview of what that Artemis 1 launch will look like. And remember, there's no people on that first mission this year. We want to test everything out first before we put people on it for Artemis 2. So Artemis 2 will take place probably 1.5 to 2 years after Artemis 1. And we'll have crew on board this time. We'll have 4 crew members inside of Orion, and this mission will be very similar to Apollo 8, where they launch, they go to the moon, they orbit the moon, and they come back. So this will be the first time we've had humans inside the spacecraft while we're out in deep space. So this is a really great way to test these types of systems with people involved. And after a successful Artemis 2 mission, we'll move on to Artemis 3, which is where we send the first woman and the next man to the surface of the moon. Now, of course, there are way more pieces involved in the Artemis program than the SLS and the Orion spacecraft. And the human landing system is a huge component. And if you follow NASA at all, there's been, lots of different talk and some really cool things happening along with that on the internet if you follow along. like NASA does with many things, we do contracts with companies. And this time we did a procurement where we asked the space industry, hey, we want you to come up with what you think is the best idea for a human landing system, which is different than how we normally do it. We normally give them the specifications and exactly what we want, and then they go and we hire someone to build it. This time, we did it differently, where we asked industry, you tell us how you think we should land on the moon and what's the best way. And here are the top 3 solutions. So it's really interesting how different they all are. You have our Blue Origin team, which includes Lockheed Martin, Northrop Grumman, and Draper. You have Dynetics, and then you have SpaceX. And these 3 companies won the first round of the selection process to continue their designs and to continue to build. And then now in April and May of this year, we're going to down select to 2. And then they will receive additional funding to continue their designs. And then we'll get to the point where we have the first. That doesn't mean we won't ever use the other 2, but we have to eventually get down to 1. And so NASA would then choose the first, whichever one's going to be ready the fastest, and whichever one's going to be safe and meet all the safety requirements. They'll be selected for that first Artemis 3 mission. Now, I mentioned sustainability and long-term presence at the beginning, and this is key and crucial to Artemis and what makes it different from Apollo. We're going to the moon to stay, and in order to do that, NASA feels that having an outpost in orbit around the moon is a great solution to that long-term presence challenge, because we don't need to build a big space station. We just need an orbiting platform that has a small habitat, has docking mechanisms, it has a way for that lunar human landing system to connect to. And if we have a small platform, orbiting platform like that and around the moon, Orion can come and dock. Astronauts can get out, go inside, have a small area to live in, and then the astronauts that are going to the surface could then get in the landing system, go down to the surface, be there for however many days or weeks they're going to be there, and then when it's time to come, they come back to Gateway, get refreshed, get organized, get back in the Orion spacecraft, and come home. It's a really great solution to be able to keep those missions going, keep them going on and on from each year. Now, the U.S. is putting together that first version of the Gateway that you saw in that picture, but we also already have international agreements in place with Canada, and we're working with the European Space Agency, Japan, and Russia to expand the Gateway to make it just a little bit bigger, so that it could accommodate more astronauts and maybe even have some science laboratories on board. So that's not a for sure definite picture of what it would look like, but that's the concept of what it could look like as we grow our international partnerships. Now, there's lots to do on the moon. I have listened to our planetary scientists talk about all the things that they want the astronauts to do. And one of the ladies who was in a speaking group for Space Center Houston a few months ago, she's a planetary scientist and geologist, and her job is to train astronauts on how to do science on the moon. I mean, what a cool job is that? And so, so there's so much that they are excited about, bringing samples home, you know, being able to get a hold of the ice. So we're going to have robots go down into those craters to get the ice. The astronauts aren't going down there. And so once we have that ice, can we make it clean and put it in a form that is even useful to us? We have no idea, you know, so we'll be testing new equipment to see how we can filter it and get all the regolith and all the moon dirt out and see if we can use it for drinking water. So there's so much to learn and explore as we are learning on the moon, preparing for future Mars missions. Which brings me to Mars. So, right, that's the end goal, and that's where we want to go. I truly believe we will have astronauts on the surface of the moon sometime before I pass, and I turn 40 in a few weeks, and I believe that it will happen. Most likely not happen in the 2030s, which is what, you know, NASA has hoped to have for many years. Just don't know if the funding is going to make that possible, but I do believe that we'll have astronauts on the surface of the moon, you know, in the next 30 years. I really believe that. And an important piece of having successful missions on Mars is sending those robotic precursors. And I hope you got to watch the landing of Perseverance a few weeks ago. It was, oh yeah, Drew's like, yes. It was absolutely amazing, so emotional. You know, those men and women have been working on that project for like 7 years, you know, and so it's so exciting. And we've learned so much from those robotic missions. And there's no way we could send humans to Mars without those robotic mission, the precursor missions. So I always like to tell, especially students, many of you probably will not become astronauts and go to Mars. Maybe some of you are younger enough and that can happen. But it's pretty amazing to think how this is in the future for us, and how when we do go to Mars, it will be like the moon, where we will go with industry, we will go with our international partners, and the U.S. is not going alone. This is something that would be a worldwide endeavor, and we're super excited. I'm super excited for that. And then the last picture I'll leave you with before I talk about some of the fun jobs at NASA is this image here. And imagine if you were on Mars tonight and you looked up at the night sky, this is what Earth looks like. A tiny blue speck in the sky. Just like when you look at Mars from Earth, it's a tiny reddish pink speck in the sky. And you are 39 million miles away from your home world. And that really puts it in perspective why it's important for us to get it right and not to rush, and to make sure that we can send astronauts on a 9-month journey to Mars, have them live there for a year or more, and bring them back safely. That's NASA's goal. We're doing a round trip. This isn't a one-way stop. And then for those of you who are of the age that are interested in working at NASA one day, the best way to get started is to be a part of NASA's internship program. There are internship opportunities in all fields, so communication, education, finance, business, law, and then of course there's tons of STEM careers in mathematics, engineering, and science, and all that. And check that out. Usually the internships start around your sophomore year in college, but just Google NASA internships and you can learn lots about it. And I always like to point out that we're a really diverse team, and with lots of skill sets and backgrounds. We have folks on our team that don't necessarily have college degrees, but there are master technicians and electricians and welders that put our spacecrafts together. We have a huge team of these individuals at the Michoud Assembly Facility in New Orleans, and that's where all of the building of the rockets and spacecrafts happen. We have folks that build our launch pads, and of course you have your mission control folks, your avionics and your aircraft engineers, and then food scientists. We have a food lab here at Johnson Space Center, and their job is to figure out how to prepare and package food for astronauts that is tasty but has a very long shelf life and does not require refrigeration or being in a freezer. So it's a pretty tough job. So that's a really fun career. And then, of course, we have a huge communication and public engagement team with graphic designers and video editors, people who develop apps and do web design and that sort of thing. And then you have your more traditional type engineers that work on robotics and spacesuits, planetary geologists, and astronaut trainers. Astronaut trainers that may be divers in the neutral buoyancy laboratory, or an astronaut trainer that teaches the astronauts how to use the space toilet. There's a pretty wide variety. So with that, I've talked 30 minutes now, and I am ready for your questions and to answer anything you'd like to know about Artemis, or just really anything about NASA in general.
All right, fantastic. Thanks, Patricia. We do have a bunch of questions, and let's see if I can. I've been trying to keep on top of them. Also, it's been nice. People have been indicating where they've been watching from. So some of them are local, some like Buffalo, New York, even University Park, Maryland, New Brunswick, Canada.
Awesome.
So so I know there's a few more in there that probably a little shy here. So let's see here. Let me just run through some of these questions. Actually, just another one popped in here, so I'm gonna put that on my list, and give me a moment so I can put them all up here. And here we go. So let's see here. We'll start out. I think you sort of answered some of them. I said Nicholas was asking, so if we go to the moon, then can we go to Mars? And so that's the plan. This is
yeah. And one of the big things I've heard our mission planners say is they are really wanting a 1-year checkout mission on the moon before we go to Mars, which means having people live on the surface for a year before they feel comfortable enough, saying, yeah, we can do this. We can send people to Mars. So I look towards that, a big, long mission like that to be like the final stamp of approval before we go to Mars.
Sort of the kind of thing that like Scott Kelly did, spending a year on the station to see what it's like to be,
see if we can do it and see if it's safe. And I know that there's talk of additional missions on station that will be that long, because we really need to be able to do that more consistently so that we can keep the astronauts healthy, because we all know about all the things that happen to our bodies in space. It's a really tough place to be in microgravity. And we have to be able to fix all of those things or keep them from happening before we can have these huge, really long multiple year missions on other worlds.
Yeah, actually, as it turns out, a local from this area, Dr. Joe Dervay, is a flight surgeon at.
Great, yeah.
And actually, over the summer, we did a summer camp and called the Welcome Aboard the ISS, and he actually was able to zoom in and talk about what it's like for Bob and Doug, as they prepare and what they were doing, on the station when they were on station while we were during our summer camp.
That's really cool. Yeah, we have made so much progress over the years in keeping the astronauts' bones and muscles healthy, but we still struggle, especially with the eyes. There's a lot of fluid pressure on the ocular nerve, which changes the vision and gives the astronauts really bad headaches. And then, of course, radiation is the biggest one. The astronauts are fairly well protected because they're still within our magnetosphere in the station. But once we leave Earth, radiation is a massive concern.
Right, exactly.
And there's no magic hull shielding like from Star Wars or Star Trek to protect us. Really, the best thing we have is water.
Wow.
So there's talks of ideas. And this is not happening for sure, but I've heard people talk. Well, is there a way to have water in between the different layers of the spacecraft and act as a shield of some sort? So we're going to have to get really creative.
Excellent. Well, this is, I think, this sort of really points out how going to space takes a whole range of sciences and engineering to really make it successful.
Yes.
Mike asks, is there a long-term plan to stay on the moon? And you just you said yes.
Yes.
Yeah. So
they really do. I mean, I hear it over and over again. Not just it's not just like it's not a talking head. It's like the managers and the people at NASA. Like, we want to go and we want to go to stay. We don't ever want there to be a time when we weren't consistently going to the moon for missions. Right. And so of course, everything costs money. And so NASA gets 0.5%, less than really 0.5% of the entire federal budget. So for these big missions like Artemis and even in Mars, it's going to take interest and engagement within the public and with Congress for additional funds and really great international collaboration to make these huge missions happen.
All right. So Linus asks, he wants to know if they plan on driving around on the moon this time.
They do. I have 2 pictures of rovers, so I'm going to share my screen again so you guys can see. So here's a look at the first concept. This is their lunar terrain vehicle, which is an open concept that the astronauts have to wear spacesuits with. So it's way cooler than what we had in the 60s and 70s. And no, they're not going to reuse those lunar buggies, and they're staying there. Nobody's bringing them home. But they're working on those concepts right now at Johnson Space Center. And then they have a closed, pressurized version of a rover. And you can see prototypes that we've made. The first one on the top is the real thing. And we've had that around since, I guess, the beginning of, before even the Obama administration, because it was in the inaugurational parade, President Obama's first inaugurational parade. Wow. And so these are some of the concepts that we have where astronauts could live inside of this vehicle for several days. So they can go farther away from their habitat and base and stay inside and then get in their spacesuits and go out and do moonwalks and then come back in. So yes, we're going to be driving around the moon, but probably not for that first Artemis 3 mission. I haven't heard any talk about having a rover on that mission. I imagine it would be later on, like probably Artemis 5, 6 time frame. Right.
I'm just looking at the size of that thing, and it's going to take something larger than what they currently have in place to get them there.
Yes, so like a Space Launch System size vehicle, that with the expanded upper stage that I showed you, that last version of it, that's the kind of class rocket they're going to need for these really big components to get them to the moon.
I just, I've been looking at your slides, and I didn't realize, that the sort of Earth injection speed of coming from the moon and from Mars was so great that much, twice as, I think Mars is more than twice as fast as.
Yeah, so if I remember correctly, it's 25,000 miles for the moon and close to 28 it's 26,800 miles an hour for Mars. Wow. So yeah, it's pretty fast, and that's really fast, and that's a hard part about sending humans to Mars too. Is Curiosity and Perseverance have this problem where Mars has just enough of an atmosphere to be a pain. You know, it's just enough where you have to have a heat shield, but it's not thick enough like Earth where you could slow your trajectory and slow your speed. So when we come home from Earth, from the space station, even from the moon, once you hit the atmosphere, within a matter of minutes, you've gone from like thousands of miles an hour to hundreds of miles an hour. That's not going to happen when we go to Mars. And so we do not have a solution on how to land the amount of a spacecraft needed for humans on Mars yet. So we haven't figured that out. And I know people are working on that problem, but think about landing something 10 times the size of Curiosity or Perseverance. That's what you're talking about, at least. And it's going to be tough. So there's lots of things to work out still.
And I'm sure they have done all sorts of monitoring of various parameters for both Curiosity and Perseverance. I know the cameras, just this camera angles on Perseverance were just outstanding. And then to have MRO be able to actually see it with the parachute deployed, and that was just outstanding.
You couldn't ask for a better story, a complete story experience, for that landing. It was pretty awesome.
Outstanding. Turns out actually there's another local that grew up here, now works for a sub to JPL, and he was working on the Mastcam Z for Percy.
Oh, wow.
And so I'm arranging to have him do another Friday night program. So
that'd be great. I know there's some folks in Ithaca at that university that have connections, I believe, to the Mars program too.
Sure.
So I just remember someone telling me that another group that is in New York that works that does events. So that might be another area you could tap into.
Yeah, and also another. I'm always pushing the local scene here.
Yeah.
We actually have a very IBM grew up, basically started here, and so IBM Federal Systems was very involved in Gemini, Apollo, and in the shuttle programs, and now they're even doing, I guess, the glass dashboard for Orion.
Yeah,
they're working on the software for that. So we actually had some engineers from Lockheed up here talking about.
That's awesome. We've got a really great group of folks all connected with you. That's great.
It's really neat, really neat. Matthew asks, how is Artemis's safety as compared to past space vehicles, and will astronauts be able to abort mid-flight if needed?
Yeah, so we can abort once the boosters are done with. So we have the chance to abort on the launch pad with the launch abort system, and we tested that actually a few summers ago in Florida, and they did a test for the launch abort system, and it worked beautifully. But like the space shuttle, you can abort when you have those boosters ignited. So after those first 2 minutes, they then can do an abort from there. And then once they're in space, they can always come home and do an abort if something's not right, and re-enter the atmosphere and then come back immediately. So that's why they have that plan for the spacecraft to be in orbit around Earth for an hour or so to do those checkouts before we go on to the moon.
Do the final burn.
I have been told by the Orion engineers that Orion will be the safest spacecraft that has ever been built.
Cool.
And it will have more backup systems and redundancies and capabilities than any spacecraft we've ever had.
All right, so I just need to shrink 1 more inch in order to make it onto Orion, I guess.
Oh, are you 6'5"?
Yeah.
Well, I'm sure they could make an exception for you.
I'll slump a little bit. I don't know. Let's see. Stacy asks, wanted to thank you for the internship information. That her 12-year-old has huge goals to go to Mars, and so I guess Stacy, keep your 12-year-old focused on
and my daughter, who's 10, is convinced she's going to Mars too. I mean, there's no doubt in her mind. So maybe your son and my daughter will get the chance to go on a mission together.
Excellent. Let's see here. We had a couple other questions come through here that trying to think here. How has the advancement? Tom asks, how has the advancement in materials helped the Artemis designs?
It's made a huge difference. We had an engineer talk a while ago. I was listening into a meeting about the additive manufacturing, and I'm not an expert. I'm just going to tell you what she shared, and I might not be able to answer more detailed questions. But there are advancements in the way that they build things, the way that they weld with stir friction welding, and using 3D printing capability. There are pieces of the engines, the Aerojet Rocketdyne engines, that are 3D printed.
Cool.
So they are finding ways to build faster and safer than that they have before. That will, once you get your first rocket done and everything tests out, making future rockets will go so much faster. But anytime you're doing anything for the first time, the process is immensely long. But from that point, you know, they'll be able to crank them out. Our hope is one a year, at least one a year. So yeah, there have been some pretty amazing advancements in manufacturing since the time they first started working on SLS to the time to where they're finished. Yeah.
You know, and again, you know, I was trained as an engineer, and I think one of the things that well, at least what we try to really promote here at Kopernik is that, you know, part of the engineering process is failure,
Yes.
and that's really where you end up learning the most. Yes. Is when things fail, when things break, and so you know, like SpaceX just had, you know, their
yes,
a couple of.
I love watching SpaceX succeed and fail.
Yeah.
They do everything on camera, which the United States government doesn't always do, but they do all of it on camera, and it's so amazing. I think that really drives home your point, is that it's okay to fail because that's how you learn.
Absolutely.
And you want to fail now before you get in space, right?
Right.
And so I love watching that process.
Yeah, there's actually we do a program with sort of air rockets, and if we have time, we'll show this. SpaceX has put a YouTube video called "How Not to Launch a Space Rocket," and it's all their failures, and they have it to some John Philip Sousa music, and it's entertaining.
It is. I've seen something similar with flights, like at the beginning of flight, during the Centennial flight with the Wright brothers and other groups that were trying to create aircraft. And there's a similar video out there on YouTube that shows all of the spectacular failures in flight.
Yep. David asks, when will building on the moon start? Any sense of?
Oh, well, the dates are always hard. Our initial goal is to send humans back in 2024. We're actually reassessing that goal once we complete our next process for the human landing system this spring, and then NASA will reevaluate to see if that timeline is still possible. There's been a lot of delays with COVID and some other things, and so we may end up pushing into 2025. But living on the moon, that first mission, they'll only be on the moon for like 6 days. I can't tell you when we'll be living on the moon for weeks at a time, but I would imagine, I know each time we go, we're going to stay longer and longer each time. But I wouldn't expect to have like people living on the moon for a year for probably, I don't know, maybe another 7 to 10 years from now. I think a lot of that, of course, depends on money, and just depends on how successful and things go as we move along. Dates are always hard.
Right. I think it's interesting, sort of watching in the chat. Again, we've got a really great and informed audience, and one person asked, what are the main international partners NASA is working with, and one person replied, well, okay, Russia, Roscosmos. Canada, CSA, Japan, JAXA.
Yeah. And then European Space Agency. Those are our current partners with Station, and we're just rolling right over into Artemis. The Australians are working out an agreement with NASA to contribute to lunar surface collaborations. And I know there's talks with other groups too. So NASA put together, if you're interested in learning more about that process, there's something called the Artemis Accords that you can read up on Google. And it basically outlines how NASA will work with international groups. It's not saying who we will work with and who we won't, but it's kind of putting forth the guidelines on how the United States will work with other countries.
This is how we're going to do it. And if you want to sign up, this is what you're signing up for.
This is what you're signing up for, and this is what, we're looking for people to contribute. And there will be international astronauts, non-American citizens, that will get to fly on Artemis missions too, just like we do for Space Station.
So Kim asks, how will astronauts who get to go to the moon be chosen? Any thought about?
Yeah, that's a fun one. You know what? I wish I knew the insides on how they do all of that, and then I would become an astronaut, right? But I want to show you guys a picture of our current pool of Artemis astronauts. So just like we had a pool of Apollo, and Mercury, and Gemini, this is our first pool of astronauts. Now it will grow and there'll be others, but it is equal women and men, and I can tell you their skill set is an incredible mix. So Johnny Kim is a medical doctor. He was like a medical in the medical field and the armed forces out in battle. He knows battle medicine. We have folks that are scientists. We have folks that are worked in Antarctica. We have test pilots. Joe Akaba was one of the educator astronauts. He's a former teacher. We have so many people with different backgrounds. Not everyone is military. There's a huge chunk that are what we call mission specialists that have science and engineering backgrounds. So they're going to be looking for a really well-rounded team with people. I always like to think of, The Martian with Matt Damon, how each of those crew members had 2 or 3 different skill sets that they were responsible for the missions. Engineers, botanists, you have somebody who's the medical field, and that's what these individuals will be like. They have multiple skill sets. They can train and learn quickly. They are all strong personality, incredibly physically fit, driven, incredible people. And so once you're selected, then NASA has this magic system of how they figure out who the best people are to work together and how they form teams and skill sets. And I don't know all that psychological magic set of parameters that they have, but they keep it pretty hush-hush. But they do a really great job of putting together teams.
Very cool. Actually, I think we've been working with your office and maybe with you. One of our educators, Tish Brizzi, was asking, could you show us the Artemis website?
Yeah.
We actually have used Artemis as sort of a focus of some of our girl power programs that we've had up here.
Yeah. So there's a couple of places you can go for NASA Artemis. Let's look. There's what we call the NASA Artemis Special, which would be better for, I would say, kids and just your general public that don't want to read a bunch of, news articles. And this is a really great website to check out. Let me share. So this is what it looks like. It is nasa.gov/special/Artemis, or you can just Google NASA Artemis and you'll find it. And it's a pretty cool website where you can kind of scroll down. You can learn more about different parts. You can learn in detail about our Artemis program. It talks about how our different technology and successes will change the world. There's a how are we going part that talks about the vehicles that I mentioned, and you can learn more by clicking on the Orion or spacesuits or something like that. Here's our mission patch for Artemis 1. We go in and talk about other videos and some other really cool updates on what's going on. And then there's a mission page too. You could do Artemis 1 mission and it would take you to a mission. So you could read a lot of the blog posts and articles that kids might not want to read, but adults will probably find interesting. Yeah.
Excellent. Excellent. Let's see. Matthew asks another question. Is as far as building a base on the moon, is it planned to go directly to directly land parts using an SLS-derived system, or will it be placed piece by piece, with each mission?
That's a great question. The way I understand it, and nothing is ever final, is that NASA will not only use SLS, but it's looking at commercial rockets too, in the hopes that commercial industry will be ready to send cargo to the space station. To the moon. And so these really big pieces would be sent and pre-positioned on the moon. And we would do the same thing for Mars. So some of those habitats and rovers could fly on SLS. If there are other rockets that are capable of doing that work when we're ready, NASA could buy services from them, just like we're doing for the CLIPS mission. So the Commercial Lunar Payload Services, or CLPS, is our acronym. We have commercial companies that will be sending robots to the moon to do different science work in areas before humans go, or even while humans are there. So I think there's like 15 different awards that have already taken place, and I think our first missions, Eclipse missions, will probably happen within a year or so. So you could check that out if you wanted to learn more. But cool. This lunar thing really will be a mixture of industry, commercial, capability, and government capability.
Super. Well, this is I haven't seen anything new come through here. Trying to think if I had any other comments. No, I think that's it. Again, it's been great getting to know a little bit more about this Artemis program. I think, like everything else, it will continue to evolve. It
evolves every day. Something new is happening every day. It's like, oh, don't say that anymore. That's changed. Or, ooh, this is something new. Every day it's something new and different.
Yeah.
And so follow social media, for NASA Artemis, if you want to stay up to date, because these next years between the Mars robotic missions and the Artemis program, and then we have the Webb telescope. There's just so many cool things happening with NASA right now. So stay engaged in social media is a great way of getting the highlights.
Absolutely. I thank you for spending some time with us this evening, and thank your office for all that you do to reach out and engage and inspire little ones, but inspiring us
too. Yeah.
us
You're very welcome. That's part of our NASA's charter is to share the amazing work that our agency does, and so we're happy to do that, and if happy to collaborate with you in the future for sure.
Well, thank you, and again, it's part of what we also try to do is keep people inspired. And I'll just deviate slightly, but again, with this Girl Power program that we have, we always trying to promote women in STEM, and so we'll always open it up to to young women between like 2nd and 8th grade or so, and talk about a particular topic. And a few years ago, we had an astrophysicist from Goddard Space Flight Center talk about the work that she was doing, looking at the CO2 levels, using satellites to look at all that, and then at the end of her presentation, the kids would get a chance to ask her questions, and one girl asked, "How did you become interested in astrophysics?" And her answer was great. She said, "When I was in college, I was an English major, but my boyfriend was a physics major. We would go from observatory to observatory. I eventually dumped the boyfriend, but I kept the astronomy."
You know what? I've heard someone say the same story, so I think I know who you're talking about.
Oh,
yeah.
Okay. But that's the whole thing is that you never know where a seed's going to get planted.
You don't.
And how
I never in a million years thought I'd work at NASA. I got a degree in early childhood education and thought I was going to be a 2nd grade teacher. And one moment walking through my college in the student hall building, and someone was looking for camp counselors for Space Center Houston. I'm like, oh, that'd be a fun job. And then I never taught in the classroom, and I've just continued to grow and learn and do all kinds of things that I thought I'd never do. So you just never know. You have to be open, to those interactions and those chance opportunities.
Exactly. So thanks again for everything you all do, and again, for spending the evening with us. I thank you all who have been watching from Colorado and
Canada.
And from Canada, exactly. And my wife even commented, "Hope to meet you." So someday we'll travel down to Houston, and we'll get a chance to pop in and say hello.
I'd love to host you once we start doing tours again. I would. Always invite any of my museum and planetarium friends. If you're ever in Houston and you want a special tour and I'm available, I'm happy to hook you up.
Well, thank you so much. Thank you so much.
So just let me know once we open the center again.
All right. So again, for those of you who typically watch for us, we're trying to line up more speakers. Again, we got a couple people that said that they will present. We're just trying to line up the dates. So we may not have something next week, but keep. If you haven't already subscribed to our YouTube channel, please do. You can go to our website and get on our email distribution list, and we'll keep you up to date with what's going on. And we are really hoping that by sometime later this spring or early summer, we can actually open back up again. And now that we've got the technology, we may be able to do a little hybrid where we do both in person and also live streaming at the same time. So you could give us an update in the future, and it'll be great to have you back. So
well, happy to. Things will probably be very different in a year, and I'll have all kinds of new things to share.
I hope in a good way. Yeah, exactly.
In a good way, yes.
And again, for those who are watching, again, if you enjoyed tonight's program and are in a position to, there's a little donate button down below. Anything you could offer us to help keep the live streams going, and we would appreciate it. So, Patricia, have a great weekend. Stay safe. Keep wearing your mask, and we'll do the same up here. And we'll see you soon.
Awesome.
So
Good night, everybody. Thank you for having me. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.